This is your fortnightly instalment where I interview a trailblazing physiotherapist that has shaped the profession we are today. In celebrating their journey, knowledge and insights, you gain the opportunity to plan and guide your own professional journey. My name is Doug Carey and welcome to Physio+10. Okay, welcome to new and previous listeners to Physio+10. Today our special guest is Associate Professor Dale Edgar. Welcome, Dale.
Thanks very much, Doug.
Can you start by giving us a bit of a background with regards to sort of where you grew up in your early schooling?
Yeah, I'm, rightly or wrongly, people don't like this, but I'm a Queenslander by trade. And so I was born in Britain, but I lived my childhood in far north Queensland, near Townsville, a little place called Home, which is a cane farming town. I grew up there, did my high schooling, and then I ended up going and doing my physio time down in Brisbane. I did with the type of career advice that we had at the time in Home Hill and in Townsville. I ended up doing a year of science and then flipped over to physio. Because it was either if you go into uni in a place like that, I was first into uni from my family, and going into uni from a little town like Home Hill, it was like science or arts, and so I went science, and then ended up flipping over into physio once I probably had a better idea of what uni could deliver or what uni was about, and and then as a child, I guess I had a pretty active childhood. I was a chubby kid, which didn't help. But I eventually trimmed down enough to be able to play squash. So sort of squash and tennis were my things during uni and back end of my high school years. I guess being a cane farming town, we had access to farms and farming. All my mates were farmers and that sort of stuff. So you're driving early and all of that sort of stuff. So we had quite a liberal and active childhood, I suppose.
Where did you fall in the family structure?
So I was the oldest boy in a family of three kids. My two sisters younger than me, but we were quite spread out actually. So we ended up having a family that had 11 years top to bottom.
Okay.
So 5 or 6 years between each of myself and then my middle sister, and then again 5 years to my youngest sister. So I was well and truly changing nappies when I was when my youngest sister came along.
Yeah, I was going to ask that, like, because of the age gap, did you sort of find or feel you're almost like an only child in some way?
I don't know that I felt like I was an only child. I guess I felt because I was obviously I was a lot closer to my mum. I guess I was very quickly comfortable with the idea of helping with my little sisters, and in some respects I guess it's a bit of an only child being first into uni and then ending up going away before my sisters were even at high school. So that's interesting. As you got siblings coming through high school, they know the sibling above, and they got, I guess you get a reputation in inverted commas with the young kids coming through. But my sisters basically went through schooling, or particularly high schooling, without that influence of me. Certainly teachers knew of me, but they were their own person. I guess I was too. So
from your science degree or your first year of science, what was it then made you decide to go to physio? Because obviously there would have been quite a few options.
Yeah, so I got a good TE score, so I could have done anything really, apart from medicine, going into uni at the time. And I was, or at least I thought I was interested in physics. So I did high-level physics, I did applied maths, I did maths, uni-level maths. And then I don't know exactly what flipped me over into physio, but I probably recognised that I was a bit more of a people person than perhaps being a maths nerd. I mean, the maths nerd, stats nerd still lives on, and my science sort of background, I guess, has driven me towards a research career, I guess, if I'm honest about where my motivators have come from. But I think I flipped over from doing what I guess was going to either lead down a road of teaching or a road down a road of academia with some, what I guess is fairly bland, what I perceived at least as being a fairly bland career. And so I started looking around as I got into the back end of the first year, and I changed over to physio. And yeah, I really, I have never regretted that decision. It's been for me, I think it's been the right decision in terms of my career and where it's got me to and what opportunities it's provided to me. So, yeah.
How did you find that sort of university experience? Like, you would have gone into physio officially 1 year older than, I guess, most of the graduates. How
Yeah,
did you find that?
it was quite interesting, I think, because my first year of physio, of course, because I had a bunch of electives that were, I got credit for in the first year of physio. I had a pretty easy year of physio in the first year, I guess. I met my wife at the back end of that year, the person who turned out to be my wife. So, the end of my first year physio, I started going out with Suze, who's obviously now my wife, and we've got 3 lovely kids. I guess for me, physio, the first year of physio was really about, trying to come to grips with still being relatively chubby and body aware, or body, not, I guess, happy with my body, and then having to disrobe and jump in front of people, and, having that comparison. And I think that was probably the challenges of the first year was trying to come to terms with all of those things. Especially, I vividly remember my first prac. We had a guy who was a very acknowledged and well awarded bodybuilder, and in our class, and so he comes in with the DTs on, and and he's built like a Greek Adonis. And of course we had our tutor, the first tutor, Prue Galley was her name. I remember to the day. She just started swooning around this guy, and all of us were standing there with our, the HBF ad where the guy stands with his hands across his front. And I just remember that that first prac class so vividly, because it set us up to either develop some resilience around our own body awareness and body, unhappiness, I suppose, insecurities, or to move out of physio, because you're very quickly thrown into it. And I know there's other stories in my history where people did that. Within that first week, it was like, no, this isn't for me, and they were out. But yeah, I guess there was good times. We had great times in prac, and I think that probably has set us up for being a profession that is quite different to most, particularly in the health system. We have hopefully an awareness of movement and body, shape and posture, because we have actually done what I consider is the hard yards of actually getting down and actually seeing those things and looking and doing that properly. Whereas, if you think about any other profession within health, that isn't done. It's not a natural part of their curriculum, and that's also why I think as a profession we're very special, and we have a broad scope because of exactly that. We've been through those pracs that hopefully haven't been lost, even though we know that there's been some challenges with COVID. But there's those things I think set us apart as a profession right from the start.
Were there any specific highlights for you other than that first day whilst you were studying undergraduate?
Oh, we had, undergraduate time was a time of our life, and I really regret in some respects my son, who's now 18, went to UWA and pulled out of it, because the university experience is something that is nowhere near, nothing like what we had. University experience was on campus, it was pracs, it was going to the refec, it was, really bonding with your peers, and, and they're the good times that I remember, lots of good times, probably way too much good times, but, we all we had
We all
fantastic
survived.
yeah, we all survived, and not only that, I mean those bonding, you bonded with people that are now lifelong friends, and
Yeah.
as I say, I met my wife in that context as well. So, the things that I remember, very, specific, silly little lectures along the way, and the accents of a couple of our lecturers, that used to make us giggle, and it's those feelings, I guess, that you remember, rather even more than the experiences, a lot more than the experiences, because we get back together, our group of physios from nearly 30 years ago now. In fact, it is 30 years this year for us. We get back together and it's just like talking crap from last year, the last time we got together.
We don't grow up in some ways, do we?
No, exactly. It's just easy, and they're the things that are the memorable things of uni.
Where did you study?
I went to University of Queensland.
Okay, UQ.
So yeah, UQ, yeah.
And like when you graduated, like how did your career develop over those first couple of years?
I did a pretty like in Brisbane at the time. You plugged into essentially a placement system, and I was fortunate enough to get a placement in one of the big hospitals. So in actual fact, I worked at the Repat Hospital, Greenslopes Repat Hospital, which I think, in retrospect, when I reflect on that, it was an amazing opportunity that perhaps at the time I didn't really recognize. Having the ability and to access those guys who had been to war, were in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and had the stories of what it used to be like, and they had all of the classic comorbidities of being smokers and excess in life, based on what I guess now I recognize as the mental health issues that we see playing out in our health systems in our society now. That was a real grounding for me in that, and I guess I developed a huge respect for the sacrifices that those guys made. I was very fortunate, I guess, to work in a staff which was quite small. So Greenslopes Hospital, while it wasn't quite a tertiary hospital, it wasn't one of the big teaching hospitals, but it was actually a very well set up Commonwealth funded hospital at the time. And it gave me opportunities to work as a senior within a couple of years of basically being landing on the ground. So I went through a pretty standard sort of rotational orientation over a period of a year, and then in the second year I started getting opportunities to work as a chronic pain senior, and and also I think it was musculoskeletal senior as well, and so that was pretty amazing considering my age at the time, and then I got made redundant. So, which
another major decision.
Yeah, so it's funny, I guess physios don't really, I don't know that there would be too many opportunities for physios to be made redundant, but the Commonwealth system flicked, all of the repat hospitals were flicked over into private or to other, becoming a state hospital, and our hospital was handed over to Ramsay's, or was taken over by Ramsay's, and of course I was made redundant. So I got a golden handshake after 2 years of work, or just over 2 years of work, which we promptly spent most of in our extended honeymoon going and doing the UK thing. So it was quite a weird time. I guess as a physio, you just don't think that that's ever going to happen. You think you're always going to be in a job, if you want to be in a job, and it just gave us a lot of opportunity when we went to. So we went to the US sort of holidaying, and then we went to the UK. That was our bouncing point on the way to the UK. So we spent 6-8 weeks in the US, and then went to the UK, did the UK working traveling thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned Susie. Is she also a physio? Like you said, you met her.
Yeah. So Sue's now, although Sue's has spun out of physio more into So she was doing teaching at Notre Dame, and then she sort of, during her time there, she started looking and studying, I guess, student performance and what was impacting student performance. And then that obviously, I don't know whether that's an obvious step, but it identified the issues of mental health and and anxiety, particularly as part of the mufflers of performance for high I guess high performing students, or potentially high performing students, or expected to be high performing students. And so that's led her into very much more a mental health focus. And now she's a mental health first aid trainer. She's also rolling out a mental health first aid strategy for ECU. So while she's still doing some physio stuff, it's more to do with curriculum and assessment, which is her other interest area. So she's, I guess, still physioing, but her focus is much more shifted to I guess the broader issues of mental health.
And once you got back from the UK, were you making conscious decisions about what sort of jobs you were looking for now? Had you worked out where you wanted to be?
Not really. So I was about 4 years in by that stage. So I'd done a couple of years at Greenslopes and a bit here and there, and then we worked in the UK for a year, which we just really chose musculoskeletal jobs because it was easy. There's plenty of jobs over there. It was before the time when they asked you for your jock size and every other piece of information about you, to actually get a job. So it was before all of that, which meant that we just waltzed in and, we said, the agency just said, where do you want to work? Oh, here's 450 jobs. Where do you want to work? So we started off in Oxford because we could get 2 jobs there. And we worked in musculoskeletal physio, wiped their waiting list a bit faster than we expected because we were very much used to different appointment lengths, and they thought we weren't going to wipe their waiting list, but we did, and so we ended up getting chopped off there a bit early because we were a bit too efficient, and so we ended up going traveling a bit early. Then we went over traveling again and came back from Europe after traveling for about 9 weeks and went to Newcastle upon Tyne. We worked up there, and then finally did some traveling in Africa and Africa, Egypt, Turkey, and then we went to not York, sorry. We went down to Cornwall and Penzance down in Cornwall and worked down there on our way out to Africa on the way home and back home. So we had a ball that year, and then during that time, I guess my primary sort of stuff was musculoskeletal physio, pretty stock standard sort of outpatients musculoskeletal physio, getting that experience in various contexts. I mean, Oxford was really interesting because there's sporting injuries like rowing and those sorts of things, so you get a bit of exposure to a different crowd there. Newcastle upon Tyne was very much more the oldies and a pretty stock standard sort of community outpatients, and then Penzance was probably a bit of a mix of both. That sort of set me up to think about being sort of more musculoskeletal orientated. But in the end, I plugged into the Royal Brisbane Hospital when we came back. Suze ended up going and working at Greenslopes Hospital, where we'd been, where I was, but she worked in the private sector obviously then, and I guess I was still searching for perhaps my niche, but I wasn't locked into any specific type of physio. So in the end, I worked through rotational stuff, started getting senior opportunities again at Royal Brisbane. But then in the end, the burns work came up in 1996, back end of 1996 was a rotation in burns. And I started in there, loved it, did another rotation. So I ended up doing a double rotation as a junior in burns, got my teeth into that. And I vividly remember the first time I walked into a burns dressing, and I guess in those days in Brisbane, it was basically a tub bath. I remember that nearly flaked out the first time I walked in because it was hot and humid in Brisbane. they heat the room up, and there was this guy sitting in this soup because they were using SSD cream in those days, which is, obviously pretty gruesome. And that I walked in, saw this guy, Susie, as it turned out, was the senior then, and she was showing me this, that, and the other, and I started seeing stars, and I was out. And then, but I came back, and that's been my thing ever since. I really got into burns, and I think it is because, getting back to your question, I'm sorry, I've gone a very long way of answering it. I didn't have anything that I specifically wanted to do in terms of physio scope, and what burns gave me was the absolute, what I think is the broadest scope that perhaps a physio could do. So it gave me opportunity to do acute medical, acute respiratory, ICU, then acute rehab, essentially for long stay burn patients in the hospital, and then rolling into some outpatient type rehab stuff, and then even neurological physio, my version of it, so then even though we didn't necessarily do this in Brisbane, it's actually then when I changed over to started doing burns physio in Perth, then it also opened up things like splinting and hand therapy and all of that sort of stuff, which is all part of the whole package when you're treating burns patients, because 80% of burns patients burn their hands, and so getting back, as I say, to the answer to the question, I wasn't looking for anything specific, but in the end I fell into burns. I did a year as a junior, loved it, got an opportunity to work in the pediatric unit for 6 months. So I'd done 18 months of burns, and by the end of that sort of period of time, I went to the first burns conference. That was at the end of '97, and that was over in Queensland and New Zealand, and I saw what I really did try and listen at a conference, which sometimes we don't always listen at a conference, but that was my first one, so I was starry-eyed and listening, and I saw what Fiona Wood and her team were doing over in Perth, and I saw that was very different to what we were doing in Brisbane. I also, I guess, reflected on the fact that the guy who was running the burns unit in Brisbane was very much at the end of his career, and I guess that sort of dictated to a certain extent what his capacity to change, the model of care and the way that things are done. And I guess that orientated me to the shiny new toy over in Perth, such that we up stumps and moved over to Perth in '98. And I was fortunate enough to get a junior job in the burns and plastics role.
I hadn't really thought about that, but see, what you're saying is that burns itself is an area, but within that there's almost the whole gamut of physiotherapy underneath that, because you sort of target so many different aspects of physio in a burns type patient.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess, as I say, that's why I love it. I just love it because you get to do everything, and maybe someone would argue that jack of all trades, master of none, but
I rural physiotherapy as well.
Absolutely, and I guess that's why I do connect very well with the guys out in rural practice, for two reasons. One is that something that perhaps other physios don't necessarily get a great deal of exposure to is prevention, education. So immediately after, when I first arrived, we started we got plugged in as the physios going out and presenting, doing multidisciplinary presentations out in the local communities. So 5 times a year we'd go away, and so I saw a lot of Western Australia going around doing our education days, being part of that, which was one, great for the travel, but also it just allowed us to actually connect to colleagues all around and do practical training, which the whole COVID thing has pretty much kiboshed how much the practical components of what we've been able to do, which with the program which is called the Burn Management Program. So essentially we would so being a significant part, a person within the education and training component of around burns and burns care. And then also being exposed to, through Fiona's profile, being exposed to being able to be part of the prevention and severity minimization campaigns that is, burns is completely preventable. So, being part of that, that's presentations to the local Rotary Club. It's, presentations to, any community group that would have us. I was always calling myself the ugly sister, because if they couldn't get Fiona, and particularly when in 2005, when her profile really shot through the roof, and her schedule just got jammed up with multiple requests, then she'd pedal out various different people of the team, and I was one of those people who I guess could fill some of those spaces where we were presenting our outcome, and our data to various community groups, but also using that as a platform to prevent burns, to peddle first aid messages, because we did I think a really sentinel piece of work in 2016. We got it published, and that was all about it demonstrated that burns first aid was a significant benefit to the patient, minimized infection or reduced infection by over 50%. It reduced length of stay by 2.3 days median time frame. It reduced surgery by 13%. It actually reduced the area of burn and the volume of tissue damage by factors in the order of 20 to 30% as well, just by doing good first aid. So I really became an advocate for peddling that message. And
would a key aspect of that message be cool running water for 15 minutes?
So it's cool running water for 20 minutes. Within the first hour is ideal, but within the first 3 hours is still beneficial. The other, and we don't usually say this out loud, but there is benefit in any time frame up to 20 minutes. There's a dose dependent dose response benefit to up to 20 minutes of cool running water. In the rural sector, one of the things that people have to consider is that cool running water for 20 minutes is not always feasible or accessible. So we talk about using cool wet towels and basically taking them on and off every 3 to 5 minutes to get you 20 minutes of cooling, because you need to replenish those towels, otherwise they heat up and then you're not really doing the cooling bit. Yeah. And the other one is spray bottles. Fiona is always suggesting that ambulances have a spray bottle for water and use water spray evaporative cooling in instances where water is short.
You could just jump in the ocean down here at the moment and you'd have unlimited supply of that cool water.
Correct.
Now, your working day is sort of split between research, the burn injury research note at Notre Dame, and you're also clinical director research at Fiona Wood. Then you've got the lecturing component of your work, which is Notre Dame and James Cook University in Curtin. And you've got a clinical caseload at the adults burn unit at the Fiona Stanley Hospital. So how does your actual average week work out for you?
I guess probably 8 to 10 hours of additional work a week on top of my 38 in clinical. Well, actually, for a long time, I've been, I'm being facetious. For a long time, I was half and half. So, half time academic research, which was all part and parcel or components of my Monday to Friday. And then half of my time was clinical. But obviously over time, as you start to build your research profile and the research projects that you're doing, and, I guess being always curious and being someone that I guess has the advantage of working with Fiona Wood, who's got her fingers in that many pies and has that many different connections that sit outside of burns and also expose us to heaps of different disciplines, including basic science. It's my fault is that I won't say no, and so you get so many opportunities to say, yeah, that sounds interesting. I'm curious about that, and of course, all of a sudden, you've got, like during my during my PhD time, my regular activity was 1.5 to 2 hours before I went to work. You know, when I was doing my PhD, and you just chip away at it, and that works for me today. You know, I've now got a full-time job in a different area, so I've moved out of, I've executed a succession plan for my burns clinical, but I haven't quite executed the simplification plan of all of the burns research stuff that floats around. So I'm still, you know, over census in terms of my FTE. You know, I'm working full-time clinical now, but I've also got to pack around that all my research stuff that's ongoing. And I'm finding that probably to, you know, just too much at the moment. So I need some simplification of that, which isn't easy when I'm doing a full-time clinical role, essentially.
So you're talking about your clinical role at Fiona Stanley Hospital?
So no, now I've moved. I moved sideways about a year or so ago, perhaps a little bit longer. I started doing some. First of all, I started doing a little bit of work in the surgical optimization space. So, and so I moved into some project work. So I was still going with my research stuff, which is still ostensibly half my time, and then half my time was in project land. And that may seem a little bit removed from burns, but in actual fact, the inflammatory process, which is healing, is obviously the same when you have surgery. And in burns, the context, of course, is that we can't prehab people. We have to basically deal with them. And we demonstrated that, and we're still continuing to demonstrate through our research, that exercise ameliorates inflammation. And we've just got some really nice stuff going through, basic science stuff going through now, that I think will show that a little bit more objectively. So managing some of the inflammatory markers in patients who are doing, you know, strength-based exercise. So that's sort of one aspect that I'm really interested in, is, you know, where exercise fits into the management of patients who are healing. And I guess that's why I've gotten interested in the surgical optimization space, because in surgical optimization, you've got a whole bunch of lifestyle choices that patients make, which impact on their risk for, you know, this post-surgical outcome. And then there's a whole bunch of things that we can do, I guess, to try and not only ameliorate those risks, but also look at them doing more exercise and activity to manage inflammation, and inflammation being a byproduct of tissue damage. So tissue damage through surgery, tissue damage through burns, tissue damage through having a sports injury. You know, we get people exercising, but in particular, I'm interested in, you know, strength and potentially power exercise or power training in a pre-surgical mode. And that's what I was doing in project land. And in the background, I executed my succession plan for clinical, my burns clinical, because I was teaching out a master's. So we'd set up an online master's through Notre Dame, and Notre Dame didn't want to continue that program in the guise that it was. So, but we had a couple of students that I was teaching out, and one of those students happens to be the person that's taken over from me in burns. And it was the best handover I could ever imagine. So essentially I brain dumped for a whole year on this poor girl, and you know, and now she's taken over from me in burns, and I'm very happy that, you know, someone has picked up the mantle and has run with it. So and yeah, I've shifted now through a number of, you know, changing tectonic plates. I suppose I've ended up out at Armidale Hospital, so secondary hospital, but I'm now working from across the whole inpatient spectrum, which actually includes ED, surgical wards, medical wards, rehab inpatient wards, all the way up to palliative care. So I guess I've come into a place where I guess my scope of practice is once again, I guess, being flexed, I suppose. And I can't say that I'm certainly over all of the areas that Armidale is, you know, providing physio services, but I'm certainly interested in how we design the journey of the patient through our service. And so I guess my project work and where I've come from in burns, because of our longitudinal follow-up for patients in burns, that's another aspect, I guess, that I haven't really talked about. But one of the things that we set up in burns in FSH is 2 years of systematic follow-up, measuring outcomes across time. And I guess that's given me a real advantage of being able to follow up people from that acute period and understanding what we do to patients acutely, and actually being able to visually to actually see and measure what happens to patients over the next 2+ years. Now, if you think about that, that's actually relatively unique. I don't think we get too many situations where, you're actually able to follow up patients over such a long time when you've actually been part of their acute treatment. And I guess that's given me the great insight into, longitudinal recovery, and some of the, particularly, in burns patients, the issues of scarring of the mind as well as scarring of the body. And all of that has been, I guess, packaged up in what I offer now as, or where I see I can add value across the whole, inpatient spectrum out at Armidale. And so, yeah, I guess I feel like I've still got, quite a lot to offer across all of those different areas, even though I'm not an expert in certain specific areas like ICU or women's health or whatever, though I can still hopefully add value, if not in the clinical content that I bring, but I can certainly add value in terms of how we design our services, how we look at measuring outcomes, and I guess setting up some of the research and quality improvement, aspects that I think should be embedded in all of our clinical practice. So
I think that's something that we could do a lot better in private practice too, because I guess we get a big serotonin hit when we help these people with acute injuries, but when we're starting to look at the more chronic things that we're dealing with, like osteoarthritis, is one I'm thinking of, but also persistent pain, and even the guys I'm starting to see pre-prostatectomy and then post. We need to start thinking more along the lines of, like what you're saying, that, exercise helps ameliorate inflammation, and therefore all those types of people are going to benefit from it, not just from the sheer fact of being stronger and therefore probably more capable with the activities of daily living, but it's actually having an effect at a cellular level. But we need to be happy to say to these people, look, we are going to be going on a journey together, and it's not just for a couple of months. It's probably going to be 12 as a minimum, if not 18 to 24 months. And it's almost like seeing the dentist, come back every 6 or 12 months for a checkup. And I think we need to start considering that process, and I think there's a degree of concern about maybe we're over-servicing patients. But when we start to look at the research for this chronic types of conditions, it's what we're probably doing now is under-servicing them, and therefore doing them a disservice by saying this is a short-term fix, when we should be really saying this is going to be a long-term process and management program. And my role is really to guide you and coach you. You'll be doing the work, but mentally, I think as a private practitioner, I have had to change that time frame in my brain to make it more appropriate for the condition.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, Doug, in terms of one, adding value to patients' lives. But the other thing that I think is really important to consider here is that we're in this for the long game. And I think that as a profession, we need to really challenge ourselves to determine where we're going to, put our stick in the sand. Because I think on one hand, we need to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater and start taking hands off people. And there's certainly factions within physiotherapy who, it's all about education, and absolutely, I'm sure that the majority of my impact in any situation is the education that I provide to patients and getting through to them. That goes without saying, but I think that there's a big component about our hands-on that I think people are moving away from because they want to be little doctors, or they want to, or they want to, they want a job that isn't going to have that component to it. I don't know exactly what everyone's motivator is in that space, but I think it's a really dangerous thing for us to drop as a profession, is our hands-on component, and minimize that. And I'm not talking about machines and that sort of stuff. I think that that's another issue all again. And I think that we need to potentially revisit where electrotherapy fits in amongst all of this as well, because I know that, that's all being thrown out once again when there is good evidence to suggest that tissue healing, wound healing, tissue healing is benefited by electrical stimulation in various different forms. So there's another component in there that,
we'll pass on that for the moment, but whether
exactly.
it be laser or ultrasound or
whatever, it's energy delivery.
Yeah.
Essentially, energy delivery to friable cells is something that I think
is stimulatory.
Is a huge area that we're once upon a time we had a big footprint in. Perhaps we overstepped that footprint, and now we're pulling back from it, and I think we need to get back to where the evidence sits. And then I think that the other aspect of what we as a profession need to really put our stake in the sand is actually look at exercise as therapy, or therapeutic exercise, and where that fits into the holistic management of patients over time, and where we can add value in leading up to an event, whether that be surgery, or whether we can add value after an event, after an injury, or whether we can add value to someone's general life and well-being, quality of life and well-being, because they've got a chronic condition, and I think we can add value in those spaces, and creating a community around a private practice or a community around a hospital where you've got outpatients, and I think that's the long game has to be something that we as a profession start to think about, because transactional physiotherapy is going to die. It is just there is no way that can survive. Particularly with the move.
Just elaborate a bit on what you mean by transactional physiotherapy.
Well, when you're talking about reducing someone's acute pain, and they go away, and you've done a great job, as you say. You get that serotonin hit. You've helped someone. You've interacted with someone at a personal level. You've managed to get them through the other side. But then it's very obvious to me that a scar takes 2 years to mature, and to finally end up in the place where it's either causing you some long-term chronic disability, and that, and the vast majority of patients don't have that, but there's a significant number of do. And so we are going to stop our treatment after 6 weeks or 12 weeks if it's maybe it's a fracture and it's 12 weeks, or maybe it's a bit longer if you've got. So I guess talking about being part of that person's recovery, coaching, but also then having an idea of how we could make their lifestyle choices overall, and coaching them through improvement of lifestyle choices is something where I think that there's a huge opportunity for physios, because we have the knowledge, to be able to go and into that space. And there's plenty, we don't have to fight with ex-phys. There's plenty of work if we really want to try and look at how we develop all of that. But I think that that's one of the things that we make the mistake of, is that, we're patch warring because we think that we might lose $2.50 in a transactional sense because ex-phys have taken that patient. Well, let's look at that slightly differently. There's a long game here, that you will be as busy as you want to be if you build that community around your practice, and then look at how you support people over time to deal with all of the different health issues that are going to crop up. And this is something that I guess people forget, is that we are going to have health issues crop up, and being ready for any health event, whether that be surgery, whether that be an injury, whether that be whatever, is something that is the basic premise of surgical optimization, getting ready for any health event. It might be cancer. Cancer and cancer treatment, you're not even having surgery, but you're having cancer and cancer treatment that, is now amazing. We're finding, lots of situations where people are getting cured of cancer, or potentially cured of cancer, without surgery. But, they've got 6 to 12 months of shit to go through, and then try and get out the other side and recover from that. That's not something that we can fix in a transactional way of 6 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever it is. So.
Yeah. Just splitting out your roles between clinician, researcher, and lecturer, what would you say is your number one goal for each of those? Big questions.
Yeah,
let's start with a clinician. What's your number one goal as a clinician? from your perspective?
As a clinician, I think I find it really straightforward, actually. That's not a hard question for me. It's just adding value in any interaction that I have with a patient. You know, on any given day, we can have bad interactions with patients. We can have interactions that perhaps are negative, but you know, that is the goal for me in any clinical context, is to have an interaction which is positive with patients. I'm seeking the win-win situation where the patient actually takes away one piece of that information that I've given them, or they take away a real realization that, you know, that chronic pain that they've got is something that they don't have to put up with, or that, you know, they're going to get over this injury. And, you know, we're going to work together to have, you know, this exercise program that they're going to follow through, and we're going to keep progressing that. And, you know, so I guess every interaction is part of that journey. And I think that that's really important, that you know, that you approach every interaction with the patient at the center of the decision making, and add value and look for the win-win. Because you don't want to walk away and go to bed that night thinking, oh, I've just, you know, had a really terrible interaction with that patient. They were swearing at me and I was, you know, unhappy with their interaction, or whatever it is. So, you know, sorry, I got a bit off the track there. In terms of research, I guess really simplistically, I would like to see research and quality improvement embedded in all of our practice, and that means proper outcome measurement. I think physio is actually quite pretty dodgy at actually measuring longitudinal outcomes as a general rule, because it's not easy. It's not easy to systematically measure the outcome of your patients, because it takes effort, and patients are notoriously difficult at giving that information to you without, you know, a bit of an arm wrestle and so it requires a lot of effort to actually set up that systematic outcome measurement.
It does. And I guess I'd put in there, I mean, right back to James Syriacs, and even, I guess, our Jeff Maitland with his, you know, the basic asterisk sign pre and post, and then before you reevaluate and after your treatment as well, that concept. But like, we have onboarding forms at the practice that people do electronically. And if they nominate they have a sleep problem, then they go down a particular pathway where I give them particular questionnaires that I get them to complete. And that's what I would consider just baseline information. So be it musculoskeletal, be it a sleep, or be it some sort of other specific rehab like the GLAD program, they've all got those onboarding forms that they complete, but almost without exception, the patient saying, why do I have to do this? You know, what's the point of doing this? So you've got this kind of resistance both at a practitioner level, because you have to set the systems up, and that it's not easy. Then you've got to convince the patient that it's important for them, because in private practice, I think we haven't educated them enough to understand that we're trying to go beyond transactional physiotherapy. We actually are looking at a longitudinal thing, and one of the best things we can have is a baseline, so we can come back in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, say, look, this is what you wrote, this is what you said, this is what you're experiencing. Now look at what you're doing. And so I think as a clinician, you can work your way through that process, having seen the benefit of it with longitudinal patients at 3 months or at 6 months, because it's very hard for a patient to notice these slow incremental changes. But if you've got a measurement, you've got a questionnaire that you can then repeat in 3 and 6 months' time, you know, it's just such a great black and white tool to say, look, you actually have done quite well. Here you are 3 months ago, and here you are now. So I agree, we do it poorly. It takes time to do it. But I think once you've had those experiences of particularly dealing with longitudinal patients, so as you say, if we're starting to add value to a lifestyle or to a longitudinal journey, then we can see the benefit. But probably for the short term, that's going to be difficult. We have to, again, change our mindset as private practitioner clinicians and take some baseline measurements, probably for specific groups of people rather than everybody. But I still think it's a very useful tool to have if we're looking at a longitudinal approach.
Yeah, look, I think that for me, there's, I guess, what I've learned, if people want to make less mistakes than I have in setting up these systems, I would suggest that you start with a quality of life measure such as the EQ5D5L, right? That's a 5-question, one question slider quality of life measure, which gives you quite a bit of I guess, understanding of the patient's basic, quality of life assessment. And you can repeat that quite often. It's not a huge burden on patients. And then what you might want to do, and in actual fact, if you were to just send that out to your whole, practice once every 3 months or once every 6 months, if you don't want to overburden them, then what you're getting is you won't get back everybody's response, but you'll start to get back an understanding of, what your practice as a system and within the community, what your practice ecosystem is, doing in terms of managing quality, or, improving people's quality of life. Particularly if you're going forth and actually putting in a system whereby you're actually going to contact patients and start trying to look at how you coach them longitudinally and long term. But then, we would like an objective measure that helps us understand what the functional outcome is, or what the, what the specific outcome is for that patient's condition. And just starting off with those two surveys, and I say surveys because it's really difficult to get patients to come back and expend the energy to come back and give you physical measures. That's ideal. If you've got if you've got physical measures and you've got, say, a functional outcome, and then you've got a simple quality of life measure, and you've got a multi-dimensional assessment battery that you can, embed with low, you might think about just getting grip strength. So say you've got, one measure, grip strength, quick, easy, bit difficult to do unless you've got a grip strength monitor. You might want to think about doing a 1 minute sit to stand, which you can do with a chair and you can do remotely. And then, you look at a functional outcome of the WHOOS or KOOS or LEFS or whatever. You pick one of those that's fairly short and sweet. And then you've got a functional measure, which gives you, a much more physio-orientated sort of assessment. And then you've got your quality of life measure, which really is the basket that sort of holds it all together. And then if you are able to, just start to get into a groove of just giving that to patients regularly, and then being able to then reflect on that with patients and across different cohorts, and then across your whole practice, then you're really actually embedding that systematic outcome measurement, and you can sensible decisions and data-driven decisions based on the fact that you've got you're getting back objective, semi-objective measurements across a whole bunch of domains. That's, I think, really fulfilling for us as clinicians, but it's also, as you say, very motivating for patients when you reflect it back to them and actually say, hey, look where you were before, and your mobility domain and quality of life has suddenly gone from here to here. We're starting to see the improvements that we're chasing. They're the things that I think should drive our practice moving forward as a profession, because we're drowning in data, but we're not asking the right questions. It's basically what it comes down to.
Yeah, or the frequency or the specificity is just not there. It's just too much in general. So bit of a buckshot approach. Hey, look, coming back to your clinical hat, what would you say is the most common bit of advice you find yourself providing to your clients?
My script around managing long-term pain, potentially for burns patients, particularly it's pain and itch. My script has changed quite remarkably over the last 5 years, and de-threatening pain, allowing patients to, or reassuring patients that they can crash through some of that pain and get to the other side, and get to a better level of function, I guess has been what I see as the greatest tool in my kit, because everything hangs off patients' fear of pain. And if you can reduce the threat and the fear of pain, then you can actually get patients moving forward. But they'll hit a roadblock and they won't progress, and they'll start doing all sorts of funny substitution movements and all sorts of things that that then you're actually chasing your tail trying to get rid of, to try and normalize patients' movement again. Whereas if you start right at the start educating patients about what they, what is threatening pain and what's not, And I say this in the context of burns because we know that a lot of pain that burns patients get, particularly in their acute period, and this is obviously their remembered pain to a certain extent as well, is not threatening. So you can move a wound or a limb that's got a wound on it without causing any damage to that wound, and yet they get constant and significant pain messages, neuropathic pain messages, because their peripheral nerve field is damaged. And so if we can start to turn that around and allow patients to feel more comfortable and confident to move and push through pain, you get out the other side and they don't actually lose all their movement. And when the wound heals and their nerves heal and start functioning more normally, they're out the other side, they've got good movement and away they go. And you know, I believe they then, you know, progress a lot faster in terms of their scarring of the mind, because they don't have all of that negativity around pain. Now, that takes time, and that in terms of time, in terms of interaction with patients, because you have to customize those messages. You also have to, some of it's generic, but you have to customize those messages and make sure that the patient actually gets it. And it has to be repeated in a context that, you know, patients are taking opioids, you know, particularly acute burns patients, they're taking opioids, they're taking all sorts of stuff that's mind ending and they can't remember stuff. And you go to them and say, look, I told you that last week. And if you carried on about that and said, oh, look, I told you that last week, why aren't you changing your behavior? It's like, probably because I didn't remember it, you know. So having the patience to you know, keep repeating yourself, try and repeat it in different ways. Think about the health literacy of the patient, how you're going to get through and how you're going to make sure that that's a two-way communication and that they do understand what you're talking about. Some of it, they'll reflect that in their behavior, but some of it is that you actually question them and talk to them in a way such that you actually get the feedback that you're seeking to understand, that people have understood what you're talking about. Because some of the concepts we're talking about are pretty tricky, you know, particularly in terms of chronic pain.
Yeah, and I think your comment about the health literacy, I remember talking with Jeremy Lewis and with the shoulder course theory and practice, and Jeremy goes off on a few interesting tangents that relate to the broader concept of providing management for, in his case, the shoulder. And one of them is just the health literacy of the average person in the UK. And I think it's, I hope I'm not wrong, but I think it was around like sort of grade 6 or grade 7. So it's very low, and we need to realize that whilst we live and breathe this stuff every day, and the research and the conferences and the papers, the average person on the street, we just have to keep going back to them saying, well, what do you understand about that? Or what does this mean for you? And how do you see this applying to yourself? And really just get an understanding of the conversation we're having is very much one-sided. We need to make sure we're always touching base and getting feedback as to what they understand it is that we are saying, because so often they'll just say yes and they'll nod and they'll, yeah, okay. And you got to ignore the visual cues and actually ask for the verbal feedback to see where they're at with that understanding.
Yep.
As you say, it's central. If they can understand that the pain is different between damaging pain and, you know, and just pain, then they're going to make a good progress. But if they keep thinking this pain they're experiencing is damaging them, then they're just not going to proceed.
Yep. And, you know, health literacy is a huge issue. You know, all of the patient-facing collateral that we produce in the health system has to be at 11-year-old level, has to be pitched at an 11-year-old level. You know, plain language summaries are now quite challenging to write and to try and develop because of this very issue. And that only really addresses an issue of probably 60% of patients, because you've got another 20 to 30% of patients who have language issues, you know, and you're not even getting to them by writing down English. Yes. And then you've got another 10 to 20% of patients that, you know, can't take in any form of you know, collateral that we're delivering in the health system, which is based on English. You know, and so then I've done some really interesting stuff, and it's probably a topic for another day, but I've done some really interesting stuff in looking at producing patient-facing collateral with no words and just pictures only. And that's really challenging, you know, and people who can do that, the artists who could do that are very special people. And, you know, and but it does make a difference, you know, and particularly when you're thinking about the context of Aboriginal people. You know, they've got 260 nations around Australia. They've got probably almost as many dialects and different languages around all of those different nations. How the hell do we think that we're going to produce anything that's of any use to those people when they don't speak English? You can't get, you know, you cross, you know, like the UK, you might go 40, 50 Ks and you're into another nation in our environment and another whole language. How do we think that we're going to produce things that are written in Aboriginal languages that are actually going to be truly impactful when that's the context of language in the Aboriginal sense? You know, we've got to move into a space where we're talking in pictures. There's no language, and if you actually look at the collateral that we produce, even with icons and all sorts of stuff, still got words on it. 99% of the time, well, more than that probably, and so therefore it's not accessible to a very significant proportion of the patients that we treat, notwithstanding Aboriginal patients. You know, so it's another huge area, and I've obviously come across this in terms of surgical optimization. How do we reach people? First of all, we have to try and reach people at scale using digital solutions. But then the other aspect of that is, okay, well, how do we actually deal with some of the language barriers? You know, and how do we deal with that remotely? Because I can't speak any other language other than English, you know, and I certainly can't write in any other language other than English. I've got a few words of Italian and, you know, French and that sort of stuff, which get me by when I'm sort of trying to get some poor bugger out of bed, but, you know, or get them to breathe more deeply. But, you know, but that's not going to cut it when you're talking about health literacy, you know, and getting across very complex information and content. So anyway, so I won't go off onto a tangent because that's a huge area that I'm you know, grappling with when we're talking about trying to get to patients and build a system that is optimizing patients for surgery 6 to 12 months before they get anywhere near surgery. You know, if we want to truly address the challenges that we face out there in the community, which is what we're doing, we need to be able to give patients the collateral and engage with them such that we can build relationships, be they virtual or be they physical, to support them to change their behaviours that are putting them at risk. You know, stop smoking, stop drinking, or reduce drinking. You know, improve your nutrition, increase your activity. All of those things are the things that we're trying to do in terms of, you know, the core component of optimizing patients for surgery. And if we can't support people to change their behavior over a long period of time because we can't communicate with them, then we're stuffed. We're not going to, it's not going to work, you know. So
if you could
I'll get off my soapbox now, Doug.
Well, I think, you know, in some ways, you know, essentially, if we could, and this is wave the magic wand, get people to have a balanced diet, you know, reduce their meat, more veggies, a bit of fruit, sleep 7 to 8 hours, exercise 160 minutes a day plus 2 weight sessions, drink 2 to 3 liters of water a day. You know, I don't know how many health problems we would abolish, but it would sure reduce the health budget. And in some ways, it can be as simple as that. But as you say, there are many complications to it. But those are the types of health messages that, for me, as a physio, you know, in a rural and remote community, that I would want to see absolutely bombarding it. So when you sort of have people saying, "Oh, I'm not so sure if we should be having, you know, fast food adverts between the hours of 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock," to me, it's like a no-brainer. Get rid of them. You know, we know advertising is there to influence and change behavior. So if we're trying to promote a health message, the last thing we want to do is have those anti-health messages literally being put in front of the people we're trying to get rid of it from. But yeah, we won't go down that pathway yet. So coming back on track, if you could come back or step back to your younger self, I like this little question. What sort of bits of advice would you like to share with yourself, knowing what you know now?
It's a really interesting question. I think probably the first thing that I would consider is looking at being collaborative earlier. You know, I guess in your early days as a physio, you know, you're chewing up learning, you're consolidating your uni time, you're learning, you know, but I guess stepping back and trying to look at how you collaborate with patients, but also with their or engage their carers and other people to influence how those people take on your information, and I guess that as part of that collaboration, you also, you shift the context of that to being a researcher, and trying to be objective, embedding objective measurements in our daily practice. And I think that's probably one of the other things I would say if I was saying, okay, well, be collaborative, look at how you engage with everyone, including the patient, in aiming for a win-win situation. Because I know as a young physio, there was lots of head banging and, you're going to do this because, I know better and all that sort of stuff. But that only gets you so far with 20% of people, right? Or it might work for 20% of people, but that sort of coercive, aggressive, methodology is nowhere near as effective as actually education, engaging the patient at their level, and becoming, their ally in behaviour change. And I think that, perhaps it's a male thing, perhaps it's not, but I just think there's a brashness when you first come out that you know everything, and, or you've learned something new and you want to basically, ram that down someone's throat. And, so those things, just aren't going to work. You've got to have a collaborative win-win sort of approach. And then I think if I had my time again, I would have, if it'd be so amazing if I had the objective outcome measurement over time, for all of my patients, and embedding a systematic outcome measurement framework of some description in my practice as a standard. We're starting to reap the rewards of now 5,000 patients in our burns patient database, and the longitudinal data from probably about a fifth to a third of those patients, because there's still 60 to 70% of patients who don't give us their long-term outcome. But we're starting to now build that big data capacity to understand what is the true burden of burn disease in our society, and what is the true recovery pattern, and what are the trajectories of recovery, and how do we pick up right at the start of the game. How do we pick up what are the factors that are going to influence people into a better outcome versus a poorer outcome, and then that's where we're going now, is, and I guess the advice to a younger me would have been to put that systematic data capture and systematic outcome measurement in place and make that standard. Because then you can iterate in all different kinds of directions if you've got a multi-dimensional outcome measurement at your fingertips that you're using across everybody. Now, you're going to miss people, all that sort of stuff. Don't get so concerned. That's biological data collection. Biological system data collection. You're going to have missingness. If you talk to an academic, they get all wound up about it and their knickers in a twist. But, you don't have to. What you need to do is actually start by getting that systematic data measurement. And then you iterate on how to make it better over time. You iterate on whether you're asking the right questions. And then you actually start to look at, okay, well, there's certain groups of patients here that I can measure now, and I can understand, well, right back at the start, if I were to do this, I can nudge someone from a poor trajectory of outcome to a better one. And that's really where we're at the moment. Our data is maturing to the point that we're actually really starting to dig down into that sort of space, which means that we're talking about individualized medicine in a physio context, which is quite exciting. And then we're starting to also, we're also able to bring in with that some of the basic science, phenomic profiling and other things that, as I say, Fiona Wood and other people have their fingers in. If we can bring that together with, understanding the clinical course of patients and how we train their muscles and all of those sorts of things, we bring those things together. That's really powerful when we're starting to talk about individualizing medicine from a point of view of prescription of physio exercise. Sorry, I've got a bit off track there, but I think they're the main things. Be collaborative, set up your systematic data outcome, data measurement system. And I guess stay curious. That's what a researcher is. I think, if you look at the basic definition of a researcher, is to always be curious and be asking questions about why does that happen that way, and and then trying to work backwards to whether you can influence those things, whether the factors that you identify in terms of patient outcome are modifiable way upstream, so that the next time you see that same context in another patient, you've got an opportunity to have that great interaction with that patient and nudge them from a crappy outcome to a better one, and it's those watershed moments that we're trying to identify in a patient's course of care that I guess we've had in burns. We've had that advantage of being able to observe those things over time, which, as I say, other systems don't really give people that advantage, whether it be private or whether it be, even other components of our health system. It's rare that we get that opportunity to actually observe what the outcome for patients is. We guess it a lot, or we might ask it in certain ways, or we might have, certain surveys, but actually to be able to observe that and then marry that with outcome measurement is a real privilege, and a real advantage, I think.
Yeah, and just finally, where would you like to see our profession going in the next few years?
I think I already alluded to this. I think we have to take stock and decide how we're going to play the part of long-term management of patients. And I think that comes down to really simplistically becoming partners with patients and developing, a community around our practice as central, and adding value, particularly in terms of exercise, and how do we add value in terms of exercise being a preventative activity. It might then flick into being a therapeutic activity if there's a particular health event or a particular event that pushes people off their trajectory of preventing problems. So I think that there's heaps of work in that space, and I think that's where we as a profession need to go. And then there's ultimately bucket loads of contexts of different disease contexts and different condition contexts that we can apply that in. But really, it's about, for me, exercise and activity as the potential silver bullet, and it's just a case of how you actually get people to change their behaviour around that. And as part of exercise, you're also changing nutrition, but also then applying that across different health literacy contexts. Different disease contexts, and that's where there's no hope for a patient to navigate our crazy health system with all of the different factors that are going to influence their choices without someone to help them to navigate that. So I guess we'll be navigators, but I think as part of that we bring a real tool in our kit, which is exercise and activity.
Yeah, great. Well, Dale, thank you so much. I wasn't expecting to have such an interesting conversation around the patient pathway. I think that's something that, and I'm coming from a short-term private practitioner's perspective, I guess, and I've definitely realized the last few years I need to expand that. And I like the idea of patient communities and patient pathways. And I think there's a lot we could learn from that concept. And so, thank you very much for sharing your journey and also your ideas and your enthusiasm. And let's hope some people take on some of these concepts, because I'm actually going to be, I've just written down a few notes. I'm going to be taking some of these to my partner and looking at how we can implement them in our practice. So thank you very much.
Well, look, thank you, Doug, for the opportunity to chat today. And, that's really affirming that you've taken something, and hopefully you might start to think about that systematic outcome measurement. I think we as a profession have a fantastic opportunity because of our scope of practice. And I hope that people listen to this today and think about how they might apply what I've been talking about in terms of principles in their practice. So thanks.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Physio+10, in which I trust you gained some valuable insights. It'd be awesome if you could leave your 2 cents worth as a review or rating of this podcast, and I look forward to sharing the story of another trailblazing physiotherapist with you in 2 weeks' time. Stay safe. Bye for now.